When everything becomes cheap enough to win, no one truly wins. For decades, China's rise looked unstoppable. The factory of the world, built on efficiency so relentless it seemed like an art form. Cities that never slept, assembly lines that glowed through the night, and prices that dropped like clockwork until Western competitors simply gave up trying. It was hailed as a miracle, a blend of scale, discipline, and statecraft that turned human labor into economic horsepower. But every miracle hides its cost, and China's greatest strength, its ability to make everything cheaper, faster, and bigger, has now become the very thing pulling it down. China's story is the story of modern capitalism pushed to its limits, a system that rewards growth at all costs, even when those costs destroy the very foundation it stands on. What happens when the world's largest economy optimizes itself into exhaustion? When efficiency transforms into self-destruction? To understand that, we have to return to where it all began. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping stood before the Communist Party and shattered one of socialism's oldest taboos. He told China that getting rich was not shameful, it was patriotic. And with those words, he unleashed one of the fastest economic transformations the world had ever seen. Overnight, peasants became entrepreneurs, villages turned into factories, and investors from Japan, America, and Europe saw a gold mine, cheap labor, endless manpower, and a government willing to make deals. China opened its first special economic zones, small experimental cities where ideology bowed to profit. No rigid planning, no bureaucratic chains, just one goal: attract capital and export growth. And it worked. Beyond imagination, Shenzhen, once a quiet fishing town of 30,000 people, exploded into a metropolis of millions. Within 2 decades, every province wanted its own boom. Local governments borrowed, built highways and power plants, raised industrial parks, all to lure factories. By the early 2000s, China wasn't just rising, it was devouring the world's appetite for everything: steel, coal, copper, oil. If something could be manufactured, it would eventually be made in China. But hidden beneath that unstoppable ascent was a dangerous truth. Success depended on being cheaper than everyone else. Local governments competed by cutting land prices, taxes, and wages. Companies competed by cutting margins, quality, and profit. Everyone chased growth. No one chased sustainability. It was a race to the bottom disguised as progress. For a while, it didn't matter. The machine was too powerful. Millions of workers poured in from the countryside every year, willing to labor 12-hour shifts for a fraction of Western wages. The factories never stopped. The ports never slept. Western consumers got their miracle: the $5 t-shirt, the $300 iPhone, the illusion of abundance without inflation. And China got rich. But somewhere between the 10th new shopping mall and the 100th steel mill, the system began to overheat. The miracle became an addiction. Local governments needed growth to repay the loans that funded more factories, so they built even more. By 2015, China's steel capacity alone exceeded the rest of the world combined. Entire industrial zones churned out goods faster than global demand could absorb them. Prices began to fall, not from innovation but from desperation. Factories didn't slow down when profits disappeared. They accelerated, hoping volume could make up for loss. It didn't. That's when a new word began circulating. One borrowed from the human condition but now describing an economic one: involution. It's what happens when competition stops driving innovation and starts driving exhaustion, when everyone works harder for less. In China, it became systemic. Industries trapped in a zero-sum war for market share, where the only weapon left was price. Solar panels, electric vehicles, and batteries, symbols of China's new economy, became its battleground. Dozens of companies, many state-backed, flooded markets with nearly identical products, each slashing prices to underbid the next. Profits vanished, but no one dared to stop. In a system where output equals legitimacy, slowing down meant failure. China entered an era of industrial involution, a self-destructive loop where efficiency devours profit and production devours purpose. Factories raced not to innovate, but to survive. That's why solar panels are now sold below cost, electric vehicles pile up unsold, and tech giants fight over shrinking demand as their valuations tumble. Despite record exports, China's industrial profits fell by over 20% in 2024. When everyone competes to be the cheapest, price becomes the only thing left to fall. That's not capitalism in overdrive, it's capitalism consuming itself. Ironically, China has faced this before. In the 2000s, overproduction in coal and steel pushed prices so low that Beijing was forced to intervene, cutting capacity, merging plants, and firing hundreds of thousands of workers. It was painful but necessary. 2 decades later, it's happening again, only this time the patient isn't a single industry, it's the entire growth model. But in China, politics doesn't reward contraction, it rewards movement. Factories don't close because balance sheets say so. They close when politics allows it. And politically, stillness looks like failure. Behind closed doors, officials know the truth: falling profits, rising debt, and stagnating wages. But publicly, the message stays the same: keep producing, keep growing, keep believing, because if the machine stops, so does the illusion. By the 2020s, China's engine of efficiency had become an economy locked in an arms race against itself. From the outside, it looked like triumph: record exports, glittering new factories, and endless electric cars and solar panels. But inside, margins were collapsing. The miracle had stopped creating wealth, it was merely recycling it, thinner and faster every year. Economists call it overcapacity. But in China, overcapacity isn't a flaw, it's policy. Take solar panels. In 2023, China produced more than twice the world's demand. Prices fell nearly 40% in a single year. Companies sold below cost, just to move stock. Dozens went bankrupt, yet production didn't slow, because local governments needed jobs and output numbers to prove progress. The same pattern infects electric vehicles. More than 100 brands fighting for a shrinking market, each slashing prices to survive. Subsidies cushion the pain, but they only feed the cycle. More supply, lower prices, thinner margins. Even with strong exports, China's profits continue to shrink. Factories move more goods than ever, and earn less from each one. Growth persists, but the quality of that growth is decaying from within. Some of this isn't a mistake, it's by design. China's government has mastered weaponized efficiency, using subsidies to keep industries alive long enough to crush competition. It's not about quarterly profit, it's about strategic dominance. The logic is ruthless: flood the market, undercut rivals, and wait. Western companies, bound by shareholder demands, can't match that patience. They fold. And once the world becomes dependent on Chinese supply, Beijing gains control of the future. This is the same playbook used in steel, shipbuilding, and rare earth metals, but now it's being applied to the materials of the future: solar cells, lithium batteries, electric drivetrains, the arteries of the 21st century economy. It's brilliant in theory, but fragile in practice, because no empire can lose money forever. When every sector expects the government to absorb its losses, efficiency turns into addiction, competition turns into subsidy hunting, and productivity becomes politics. That's the real danger behind China's price wars, their fiscal time bombs. Every yuan spent keeping factories alive today is borrowed from tomorrow's stability. The tragedy is that the very strategy which once made China great now threatens to consume it. Domination built on loss isn't victory, it's deferred collapse. Because it's not demand that kills an empire, it's the collapse of purpose. And in China, purpose has been replaced by momentum, a system that can't afford to slow down because everything depends on motion. Local governments need factories running to service their debts. Banks need those factories borrowing to survive. And the central government needs them all producing to maintain the illusion of prosperity. If any link stops, the rest unravels. This is the political logic of state capitalism. Production equals control. When growth falters, the state builds more factories. When prices fall, it lowers them further. When private investors hesitate, the state steps in with more credit. Every imbalance is solved with more imbalance. It's not irrational, it's survival. Because China's economy isn't just an engine of wealth, it's an engine of legitimacy. The unspoken contract is simple: keep growing, and people will keep believing. It worked when growth raised living standard. It fails when growth only makes things cheaper. The paradox is cruel. China's overproduction keeps global inflation low, but it also suppresses its own wages and demand. The country that once lifted hundreds of millions from poverty now struggles to improve the lives of those already lifted. And the more it exports deflation, the more fragile the global system becomes. Western consumers once saw cheap Chinese goods as a blessing, but that same abundance is now exporting weakness. Western factories can't compete. Developing nations can't build their own industries. The global price of cheap is stagnation. History has seen this before. Britain flooded the world with coal so cheap even its miners starved. Japan's 1980s boom ended in overcapacity and deflation. Rome collapsed not from invasion, but from overproduction. Vast estates churning out grain until small farmers, the backbone of the republic, were destroyed. Every empire that masters efficiency eventually faces the same question: can it stop optimizing long enough to survive? China's leaders understand this. That's why they talk about rebalancing, shifting from investment-led growth to consumption. But rebalancing takes time, and time is the one thing a growth-addicted system doesn't have. So while Beijing preaches moderation, its provinces keep building. More factories, more infrastructure, more output. It's like trying to diet while the kitchen keeps cooking. The irony is brutal. Many of China's most overproduced goods, solar panels, EVs, batteries, are exactly what the world needs for a green future. But when prices collapse and firms fail, even progress stalls. Cheap abundance becomes a trap, not because it fails to create wealth, but because it destroys the motivation to create more. Efficiency, once a virtue, becomes a disease. China's problem isn't too little productivity. It's too much. It has mastered production but lost its balance, a system that can flood the world with goods but can't generate enough demand to make it profitable. The same force that made China rich now ensures no one can stay rich for long, because when growth becomes identity, when production replaces purpose, and when progress is measured only by how much cheaper you can make something no one needs more of, that's not development. It's involution on an industrial scale. And like every empire before it, China is learning one brutal truth. There's nothing more expensive than being too cheap, because when a system optimizes everything except balance, eventually the only thing left to destroy is itself. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. You just have to know where to look.